Thank you so much for listening to Hustle and Heart. I'm your host, Edie Weintraub. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Jillian Blake, a mixed media artist based in Florida. Jillian, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Edie.
So for those who are not yet familiar with your work, share with us your path into the art community.
Okay, well, I have been an artist for about 25 years. I went to art school right out of college, and basically just kind of been working, like you said, mixed media. I do a lot of painting. My main focus is in acrylic art, but I add a lot of fun elements such as gold leaf, glitter, different excerpts from books and stuff. So it's kind of a real fun way to add different elements to my art. I do everything from abstract to hyper-realism. So there's a whole genre that I kind of play with, and I go back and forth between the two of, do I like all the color or none of the color? So I guess that's what every artist is we're kind of all over the map, right? But I would say my style is very unique and a little bit eclectic.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I've seen your work and it's absolutely stunning.
Thank you.
But I love getting to experience the story of the art, through the artist, and find oftentimes you see a piece of art in a studio or gallery and you don't really know the story behind that. So
right.
Tell me a little bit more about what pulled you to art to begin with, to even want to go to art school.
Well, that's a really good question. And I actually love the story behind artworks. And that's really what my art is about, is a story being told. And I'm also an art teacher. What I tell my students is it's not so much what the artist creates, because the artist really creates for themselves and they express themselves through this medium. However, you're also creating it for the viewer. And the viewer should have their own story. And that's how you have this conversation happening between artist and viewer, is what does the viewer get from it? And as an artist, I absolutely love hearing what someone else's interpretation of what I'm doing, because I have my own interpretation, right? I created it for myself, but it's really interesting to hear before I tell the story of what it is about, what other people take from it. And a good example of that was I just did a gallery opening, and it was, I did all my newest pieces, and the person, one of the people came up to me and was like, "Oh, what is it about?" And I was like, "Well, I don't want to tell you what it's about yet. I want you to kind of observe it, take it in, and then tell me what you think." And it was a gentleman. He said, "Okay, I'm going to be back in about an hour." I was like, "Okay." So he came back and he told me this whole story of what he had thought this piece was about. And I thought, wow, this is so interesting, because it was the polar opposite of why I created it and what the story behind it was. And it's in that connection that I find the art really comes alive.
That's so beautiful. So I'm so fascinated, because I'm one of those people who I don't care for QR codes at restaurants. I want my server, especially in a casual setting where there's a server, you're not ordering at a counter. I want you to tell me what's on the menu, describe it for me, like help me want what you're saying.
Right.
And I'm so glad there's a couple of restaurants that went to QR code, but they came back, because there's so much art in even presenting the menu, how they
100%.
give it to you, how the menu is organized. And so it's fascinating to see how what you're putting out inspires others and what they're gaining from it, and to see that it's so different than what you were looking to express.
For sure. It's honestly, it's in that connection that I absolutely love. And that's the reason I create.
So beautiful. So I know that before moving into making a lot of your own art and going into galleries, etc., that you were a teacher,
Yeah.
full-time art teacher, and now your art is first and center, and then you do lessons on the side. Is that correct?
Correct.
So when did you realize that you wanted to fully spend your time being an artist and creating rather than having the 100% focused on teaching?
So I will say after high school, I went to college, and I really wasn't finding my way. You know, a lot of people are like, this is what you do after high school. This is the path that you take. And I was always surrounded by my mom and dad who were artists. My dad built furniture while growing up. My mom always had her little trinkets that she would paint. And so I was always immersed in the creativity. A lot of my ancestors were in the arts of theater, music. So I come from a long line of artists. What really made me shift from that traditional path of college to going to art school was I just had an epiphany, and I said, you know, I want to be creative. I don't know how I can do that, how I can make money with that, but it is what my passion is telling me to do. And sometimes you have to take that leap and really go, what makes me happy? And I tell my kids this, I don't care what you do in life, as long as you're happy doing it and you can make a living from it. So don't worry about how much money you're making. Don't worry about if you have the nice car or the big house, because there's more into life than just money. And it should be about happiness and what is fueling you to keep going. And that's kind of was the epiphany I had right after college of going to art school was, I want to do that. So I've been doing it for quite some time. I ended up working as a graphic designer for a little bit with a company. What happened was it was sucking the life out of me, because as much as I loved creating, working in such tight parameters, making logos and making brochures, is you're working for your client, and your client's telling you, no, I don't like this. No, I don't like this. Change that. And it was really kind of dimming my sparkle. It was taking the creative component out of it. So after that, I ended up going back to school and getting my teaching degree. And so I taught for about 5 years and then had my children and periodically dabbled in, art here and there. Didn't go back to teaching for a long time, raised my 3 kids. And I want to say about 10 years ago, I really dove headfirst back into art, back into painting and really creating for me. And from there, I just kind of steamrolled, and then got my own studio, started just pumping out piece after piece after piece. And then I got, a call from the school my kids were going to, and they asked if I wanted to be the art teacher there. So, the rest is history. I'm doing my art, but also having that income as well.
But it's beautiful that you get to combine the two, because usually in, elementary school, you're either one or the other. And so to be able to share with the kids that you can have a career doing this, you're going to laugh, because I was just in Savannah and I attempted to, about 3 weeks ago when I was in Savannah, I attempted to go to this SCAD museum. Mm-hmm. And I walked in and they said, oh no, I'm so sorry, we're closing. And I said, oh, okay, I'll have to come back another time. So I went back, and because I got there early before my client got there, I was like, I'm gonna go. And so I went and I listened to her story. And Paula Wallace was an elementary school teacher in art at the elementary school my kids went to.
Oh, that's wild.
We saw that in school, she was seeing kids basically get mass produced, and they were all having the same path. And she goes, I really want to cultivate creativity and inspiration and allow these kids to express what's going on. And so she sold all her belongings. She convinced her parents to sell her belongings. And in 1978, she went to Savannah, because what a great palette for them to be inspired by. And honestly, I don't think Savannah would be anywhere near what it is today without SCAD being there. So it's just beautiful to see the passion behind artists and how, look at all the amazing, beautiful lives you get to inspire.
Absolutely. I tell my students all the time, Pablo Picasso said that everyone is born an artist, and you learn not to be one. You learn to stay in the lines. You learn to color in the box. And I like to tell my students, learn the rules so you can learn to break them. And it's the only way to really get creative, is to just make a mark. Just make one mark. Less thinking, more doing, right? Let's not think about the end result. Let's just see the journey it takes us on. Because sometimes when you make a mark, it might not be what you had initially thought. And I do a lot of that with my paintings is I go into a composition thinking, okay, this is what it's going to look like at the end in my head. And about halfway through, I may look at it and go, you know what, if I added this, it might take it into a different direction. And then I step back from it and it does take me in a different direction. And there's also times where you can put a piece of art down, sometimes for a week. Sometimes I've put an art down for 2 years and have come back with fresh eyes, and it takes on a completely different life. So I do tell my students, like, don't dim your sparkle. Don't always stay in the lines. Do more doing and less thinking about it. And when you see that light bulb go off, that, oh my gosh, you're not making me color in the lines, you're letting me like get creative. You see this whole other side of children that is like absolutely beautiful. And it's why I continue to teach and not just do my art. Is I love that component of it. And if I can be the facilitator in somebody else growing up and bringing arts into the world, then I've done my job. Because at the end of the day, we really do need arts. We need the arts in music, theater, dancing, singing, acting, and the visual arts, because it's what brings people together. I also say to them, without art, the science, the technology, the engineering, the math, all these analytical subjects can only happen if you have the art component. How do you problem solve? You problem solve through creativity. In a science project, in the scientific method, you're using art all the time in that. Mathematics, there's artists all over the place. I actually did a lesson with my students today on geometric shapes and organic shapes and the difference between the two and how to merge them together. And I want to show them that just because you may be left side of the brain, you may be analytical, that in order to really go to your potential, you have to tap into that right side of your brain to really expand what you want to do and how creative you can be.
Balance in everything is so important.
Absolutely.
So you did mention a little earlier in regards to your parents being a significant influence for you. How did you find the medium that you were most drawn to?
So, funny story. When I was in art school, I really, really hated painting. It was just not so precise. The lines weren't crisp, and I was finding it very frustrating. So when you find something frustrating, you should go headfirst into it, because when you practice it and practice it and practice it, it becomes easier and easier and easier. And the fear of not having that perfect line and making that mistake really frees you up. And I've realized that over the years is through my painting, and as I progressively get better and better and better, I am able to go, okay, this is what I like, this technique I like, oh, I don't like this technique. And believe me, in many of my paintings, there are many mistakes. You guys wouldn't know that they were mistakes, but I can see every mistake on it. But I've had to let that go. I've had to be forced to just work with the mistake that you have. And through the medium of painting, I was able to really fully understand what that meant. I started with acrylics. I tried to do oils. I don't love oils, so it kind of like, I really should push myself into oils, but I'm so old now that I'm just like, I like to stick with what I like. But I will tap into that, I think once my kids grow up and I can like really take some time into focusing on one particular thing for an extended period of time. Because what happens is I end up painting for hours and hours and hours, and then everybody else gets neglected. So if I'm going to pick up a new medium like oils, I really need a good long time where I could just focus on me and the process. But acrylics is a big medium for me. That's mainly what I work in.
Well, I think everyone really wants to know how artists get inspired and what, they might be looking to send a message on or looking for self-reflection. So how do you get inspired? What are you working on now? What have you worked on in the past? And how has that creative process evolved?
No, that's a great question. So when I first picked up the paintbrush 10 years back, and really kind of got into it, I was at a point in my life, my parents had passed away. It's today's September 11th. I was at ground zero for September 11th. So I carried a lot of that trauma with me. And then my parents had passed 2 weeks apart. So there was a lot of trauma that I was feeling, which is kind of what led me to pick up the paintbrush again, because when I was finding myself crumbling, I turned to, when was I the happiest? And I was the happiest when I was creating. So I picked up the paintbrush again. And I just kind of started expressing in a very abstract way of how to get what is happening, the chaos that is my life with 3 young children, not having any help, my husband working all the time. How can I get out of this, what's the word I'm looking for? This mundane kind of rigid schedule of waking up, caring for the kids, only being mom. How can I facilitate that into something else? Where's that inspiration coming from? And so I just kind of started painting abstractly. And I found that to be very cathartic. I found that with the colors I chose, some days they were really bright and they were really sunny colors and happy colors. And I found other days they were kind of somber colors. And I looked at each piece as kind of an expression of myself in, this is what I was feeling at this time. If they were, cool colors, the greens, the red, or the greens, the blues, the purples, the blacks, I knew I was sad. I knew that I needed to express the sadness. If I find myself one day using the pinks and the purple, or the pinks and the reds and the oranges and the yellows, I was happier. So I kind of progressed through that for a long time with abstract. And then the abstract turned into animals. And the inspiration of my first animal was an elephant. And my mother loved elephants. I have them all over my house. When she passed, me and my sister kind of divvied up all of her elephants. And one day I just looked at my abstract piece, one of my abstract pieces, and I was like, I'm gonna do an elephant on that. Because at the end of the day, an art piece is only done when the artist says it's done. It doesn't mean that if I'm done with it and then a year later I pick it up, that's okay, it's a work in progress. So I had one of these pieces and it was very brightly colored. It was pinks and yellows and oranges. And I decided to take just a thick black line and create a very abstract elephant. And I loved how it came out. And with that elephant, I was able to really focus on the eyes. And the eyes, as you have probably heard, are the windows to the soul. And I really focused on this elephant's eyes. And through the happiness of the background, I found sadness because it reminded me of my mother. And when I think about my mother, back then, she's been gone for 15 years now, but back when I first started, when she had first, passed, I was sad painting them because it reminded me of her. So I would take the elephant's eyes. So the elephant is very abstract, but the eyes of my elephants are very detailed. So it's where I found the emotion is within the eyes. So when you had talked earlier about the story behind things, this elephant painting I show to people and they say, wow, it's so beautiful. The colors are so amazing and so vibrant. And, oh, but the elephant seems sad. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly right. I wanted that juxtaposition. I wanted that juxtaposition of initially looking at it and feeling all warm and fuzzy, but then really looking deeper into the painting, because that is also what art is about, is not just glancing at something and then moving on. Artist said, Johan Miro said, you can look at a painting for a week and never think of it again. but you can look at a painting for a minute and never forget it. So I think a lot of that is where I started to get a little more detailed, a little less abstract, and a little more refined, a little more into what is my subject matter.
Oh, so beautiful. There's so much there. I think, you sharing, you're just getting something out. It's got a lot like journaling, right? That's why people tell you get up, journal, get all your thoughts out from whatever you dreamed about, or maybe even if you didn't dream, things that are at the top of your, brain. Like there are random days where I'll just wake up at 2 and I'm going, why am I awake? Like I didn't sleep enough. I really want to go back to sleep. And there was a day actually last week where I woke up at 2 and I'm like, I'm awake. I said, okay, I guess there's something in me that needs to get out. So I broke out my notebook and a pen and I'm like, okay, whatever it is, like, let me get it out. And like 3 o'clock comes around. I'm like, okay, now I'm tired. I'm going back to sleep. And I went back to sleep and it was totally fine. But then I went back and I looked at my notes going, apparently my whole being needed to get up and get this out so that I could look at it again tomorrow. So I appreciate you sharing that. What if you get to see your students all the time, and I'm sure are able to kind of see those that have so much potential. What are you telling students who want to follow in your footsteps?
I tell them all the time, just make a mark. I often see them, we do projects. Basically, I teach them the elements. There are 7 elements of art. There are 8 principles of design, and we start with the elements and we go through each one of them: line, shape, color, form, texture. And we do little projects based on that. And then the whole second half of the year is being introduced to artists, really the art appreciation component. And then we take all the elements we learned, we take the artists in which we learned from, and we kind of create from that. And what I see is sometimes when I'm like, take your sketchbook and just kind of free draw, they tend to sit there for a while and they tend to think and think and think. And I try to tell them, listen, your sketchbook is not supposed to be neat. Your sketchbook is not supposed to be your final draft. Your sketchbook is supposed to have scratches and scribbles and X's and words and the whole gamut, right? So if you're erasing, you're taking too long to erase, just cross it out. Like that's what your sketchbook is supposed to be. So I see them thinking and thinking and thinking, and I always tell them, stop thinking. Just put a dot on the paper and then make a line and then make a box. And then slowly, as you start to make that line and that mark and that shape, and then things start to come together. And then you go, oh, that looks like a face. Or I did the other day on the smartboard, I just did one continuous line, crossing the lines through each other to kind of show them to not think so much, like just make a line and just kind of cross it through each other. And then I said, and you can start to see some shapes. And I referenced it to, have you ever been outside and looked at the sky and made shapes with the clouds? I still do it. I know I did it like all the time as a child, and I still do it. And they all raised their hand, of course, because they're children. And yeah, I do that. I said, then that's the same thing. Make that line and then take a step back and see if any of the crossing lines make a shape. And so when I did it on the smartboard, I was like, oh, look, this looks like a hot air balloon. And then I just started drawing a hot air balloon. And they were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just did that. I was like, you can do it too. Let's practice. And they practiced. And I just heard all these, like, they were looking at each other, turning to each other, showing each other their sketchbooks. Oh, look, I just made a cow. Oh, I just made a star. And, that is just the best way to teach somebody how to stop being so confined, and really just start doing.
I love that. I feel like we need much more art in our lives, as you were describing before. So with that, how do you see that we could get more art in our lives? I know you've been part of a group where you go in and, as part of being in that studio, you're required to have, open hours or artist in residence hours. How can we all opt to get more art in our lives?
I think a big component, and I have a lot of people ask me, well, do you sell your art? Yeah, I sell my art. I sell all my art. I do commissions. I think a big part of that is as we grow and as we find walls that we want to hang pieces on, you find a local artist and you get to know that local artist and you start buying original pieces, not these pieces you find in these big box stores. Oh, everyone has the frog with the glasses on. I've been in 3 homes where I've seen that exact same piece. Whereas make an investment in your local artists, and then you will begin to see and appreciate art all around you. And then you can go to art openings or do those art strolls or go to a festival. And it doesn't have to be a painting. It can be a sculpture. It can be a piece of jewelry. It could be somebody making a CD with their music. Just really supporting the local arts is a great way to just have it in your home. And art is a thing that you can pass down. So it always boggles my mind when somebody's like, oh, I can't afford that, or it doesn't go with my aesthetic. Every artist does the commission work. You can get any piece in your house that is affordable for you. And that's a great way just to incorporate art into your life and appreciate it, right?
Yes, and I love when local municipalities have opportunities to foster and bring out local artists. There's a handful of different festivals throughout the Southeast that I love attending because just even looking at all the art is sometimes so inspiring and very uplifting and very energizing. So,
absolutely. And a lot of people like to say, on these, what they call quote unquote simple art, oh, I could do that. But you didn't. You didn't do it. Somebody else did it. And if you can do it, then do it. Then be creative. Because I think that the more creative people we have in this world, the happier we will be.
Couldn't agree with you more. So I know that I could talk to you for hours, but we are short on time. If listeners are interested in learning more about how to reach you and see some of your art, where would they go?
They can go to JillianBlakeFineArt.com. They can follow me on Instagram at Jillian Blake Fine Art. Those are my newest pieces that are out. Or shoot me an email at JillianSandler@me.com. A little different than my name, but that's the best way to reach me. And, I ship all over the world. So if you want a commission piece, I can do one for you. I have a few commission pieces that I'm doing right now, which is a male-female type of art. Basically, it's playing on negative space. It's using a lot of gold leaf in it, a lot of emphasis on black and white. The women are with white backgrounds and gold butterflies. The men are on black backgrounds with frogs. And there's a lot of meaning behind both of those elements, the butterfly with the frog. So that's a really interesting piece if you're looking for something neutral in your house. Those are all for sale.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing. So big thank you to our guest today, Jillian Blake, for sharing such valuable insights on her creative journey. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, keep savoring the flavors of success and stay hungry for more stories from the leaders and innovators in the world of art.
I am Jillian Blake, and you are listening to Hustle and Heart.